Hi, I'm gonna go over spray tip. There's a lot to spray tips, but I'm gonna try to cover the two types or sizes. There's the Rack 5 compatible tips, which is made by Graco, and also everybody else makes tips compatible with Rack 5. So if you buy a tip from Titan or TriTech or anybody, it's going to be Rack 5 compatible. And then there's the Rack X, and that's exclusively Graco. First three numbers are always the part number of the tip. Or like here, the first three is a FFLP, first four. And so that's the part number. It tells me it's a fine finish, low pressure tip. A 286 tells me it's a Rack 5 tip. And then the last three digits is always the size of the tip. Like this one is a 521. This fine finish is a 210. And so I gotta tell you, the fine finish tips always end in even numbers. Like if it's somebody tells you, I got a 314. The 14 tells you they're using a fine finish tip. If they say I got a 515, that's a regular old 515. And then there's the sizes. Like let's go with the 515, let's say. The first number is the size of the fan at 6 inches, but nobody holds the gun six inches away. They hold the gun a foot away, so you double that number, so it's a 10-inch fan. The second two numbers are the size of the hole in thousandths of an inch. And that's used so you know how fast the material is going to come out. Like for example, a 15 thousandths is a 1/4 gallon per minute tip. And it doesn't matter if it's a 215, 315, 415, 515, whatever. It's always going to be a 1/4 gallon per minute tip. Just the fan size changes. On the construction part of the deal, there's these components. There's your tip guard. They call it a guard for a reason, because you can inject paint under your skin if you hold it within 5/8 of an inch. That's why they got that. If you do this, boom, paint goes under your skin. Get your ass to a hospital or an urgent care, tell them what you did, and they'll clean it out. If you're like, oh, that didn't hurt, wait till next morning, your hand's gonna be the size of a cantaloupe and they might amputate. It'll be gross. You don't wanna do that. So that's the tip guard. And then there's the actual tip. The tip is comprised of a couple of pieces. There's the barrel. Remember I was telling you that the Rack 5 is a little narrower than the Rack X? And then there's the handle, obviously, that you use to turn it. And then there's the actual tip, the little tungsten carbide piece on the inside. And there, they cut that. It's magic how they can cut it to specific flow rates and specific sizes and specialty sizes too, I'll tell you about. And like, for example, like fine finish tips, they have two tips inside there. There's the one that makes the fan, and then there's another one back here that smooths out takes the turbulence out of the paint before it hits the fan. It's crazy. And there's the seat. It goes like that, metal to metal seat. And when you spray, little piece of crud gets in there, you turn it around, you blow out the crud, turn it back, continue to spray. And then there's the seal, the rubber part. And that's the part that seals it against the gun. The seat seals it against the tip, the seal seals it against the gun. And those are, that's the construction of your spray tip. Now there's specialty spray tips, yeah? Like the latest invention in spray tip technology is low pressure tips. Usually with latex paint, you had to have about 1800 PSI to get the tails out of the fan or to have a good fan. Some really smart people figured out how to cut this hole so the tails go away at about 1200 PSI. So it means you have less overspray, a softer spray, smoother finish. You used to have to do air assist airless for that kind of work, and now it's available in specialty spray tip. There's also high pressure tips. A lot of silicone coatings, 100% solid, stuff like that requires 7,000 PSI. And I've had it before where I put the tip in the clean out position, press the trigger, boom, shoot the tip through 3 layers of cardboard. Granted, it was a Chinese tip. But on the high pressure tips, it's not just pressed in there, it's screwed in there. So that can't happen. And sometimes on spray tips, I don't know if you can see that, where even when it's not fine finish, they put a diffuser bar in there to take out some of the turbulence, so the actual nozzle itself gets a smoother fan. There's fine finish tips. I told you about that. That has a spray tip and what they call a pre-orifice right behind it to take out the turbulence. There's WideRac tips. Let's say instead of a 621, WideRac tips are called 1221. So this is a 12-inch fan at 6 inches. Yeah, it's crazy. So you hold your gun a foot away, you have a 24-inch fan. That works out great for roofing or just panels, just big panels. However, size it different, because a 21 is a half a gallon a minute tip, but now you're spraying twice as wide, so make that a 1 gallon a minute tip. So order a 1231. I'll get into that a little bit later. And then they also have striping tips. Like regular spray tips, they put out a fan like this so you can overlap, and this part here isn't double the thickness. That's why it's narrower. So then when you keep going, it ends up being about the same amount of coating. Striping tips are cut so it's just as thick on the ends as it is in the center. It's crazy. And so keep that in mind. A lot of times if you're spraying in really cold weather, you've only got an electric pump that kicks out 3,300 pounds, you're getting tails, try a low pressure tip. That'll probably get the tails to disappear. Next thing to consider is, I've been talking like a 15 is a .015 is a quarter gallon per minute tip. A 21 is a half a gallon a minute tip. 27 is 3/4. A 31 is 1 gallon. A 45 is 2 gallon per minute. And so when they say that, that is, anytime you hear flow rates for spray tips, that is with water at 2,000 PSI. So what you're spraying is probably not water, so it's gonna not fly out the gun as fast as water, but you're spraying at 3,000 pounds, so it's probably gonna be a little less. Yeah. So instead of half a gallon a minute, you might be spraying at 0.4 with paint. So keep that in mind. And so if you're trying to figure out what size tip to use on a particular job, I usually go by coverage rate. Yeah. So if the paint goes 400 square feet per gallon, if you're doing panels or big stuff, then I usually try to size or at 100 square feet per minute. Yeah, 100 square feet per minute is not unreasonable for a wall or a roof deck or whatever, unless you're doing bread boxes or machines or elevator doors and stuff like that. So, 100 square feet per minute. And I think it's a cross multiplication, so 100, we'll just take the 2 zeros out. So we got 1 gallon per 4 minute. So that comes out to 1/4 gallon per minute, which tells me you should be using a 15 thousandths tip. However, if you're a good sprayer and you go really fast, you might want a 17 thousandths tip. If like you're roofing and your stuff goes on 1 gallon per square, so I know then that's 1 gallon per minute. If it goes on 2 gallons per square, that's 2 gallons per minute. So use a 31 or 45 or whatever it kind of tells you, and then pick whatever fan size you want. If you're doing, if you got ribs, that if you have an 18-inch fan and you got 12-inch ribs, it's going to make shadows. That ain't going to be right. So get a 12-inch fan or something like that. So painters use the widest variety of tips. So like for finish work, like they make tips that go down to 6 thousandths of an inch, and be sure to put in fine mesh filters if you do that, and that's for like cabinets, elevator doors, bread boxes, I don't know, but like typical, like let's say trim packages to houses, doors and trim and stuff like that is an 11. Although nowadays, like 311 used to be the tip of choice for trim packages because you could do trim and doors. But nowadays everybody uses the fine finish tips. So it's either a 10 or a 12. If you're doing general stuff, like overhead doors, walls, bigger stuff, it's anywhere between a 13 and a 19. If you're doing like high build or thick coatings like block filler, 100% solid, stuff like that, it's generally between a 21 and a 27 thousandths tip. If you're doing roofing, it's a 21 for the primer, 1/2 gallon per square, 31 for the top coat, 1 gallon per square, or 45 for the asphalt top coat, 2 gallons per square. Or if it's a mastic, you're doing like a 61 or an 81 or 75 thousandths or some crazy ass size. If you're doing waterproofing, then it's a 25, 27 thousandths tip. You gotta keep in mind, if you're doing vertical surfaces, you can only, the formula only works until the thing sags. So be careful about that. Fire blocking is anywhere between a 21 and a 25, but there, make sure you choose a thinner tip, because you're doing just the spaces between just spaces or beams. So you do a 321 or 221 or 323 or something like that. And then striping. Striping is almost always kind of a 4-inch line. So there, the preferred tip is a 3. Like, so if you're putting a 4-inch line on finished concrete, use like a 315. If it's seal coated asphalt, then use a 317. If it's unseal coated, if it's like fresh asphalt, use a 321. If it's outdoor, like rough concrete, then use a 319. Every sprayer you buy or striper you buy is going to have a 319 tip on it. So that's kind of a good place to start, and then you can go up or down depending on if you have a line driver or not. You're going to be putting on a bigger tip because you're hauling ass. As far as troubleshooting goes, the number one thing is tip clogs. So if you're having a tip clog, the number one thing there is debris. Yeah. But so debris is always, turn the tip around, blast it out, and keep going. If it happens a lot, either put a filter on there. If it happens like exactly 5 seconds after you press the trigger, every single time, it's probably not debris, it's probably pressure loss. Pressure loss is a sure way to clog a tip as well. If your paint is too thick, if your hose is too long and skinny, if your tip is too large for your pump, if your pump isn't working right, all of those is going to be, you press the trigger, it's going to fly out the gun until the pump can't keep up, or it's going to basically fly out the gun faster than the pump can push it through the hose. Your pressure drops, your tip clogs. You got to figure that part of the deal out. Then there's also tip clogging because, well, not because, but the thing to keep in mind is when you have, let's say, 517, the hole in the tip kind of looks like that. If you have an 817, the hole in the tip kind of looks like that. So you can picture this clogging a lot easier than that. So keep that in mind. And maybe if you're using 917 and or some crazy ass size and you're getting a lot of clogs, maybe put on some filters. If you like that tip, put on some filters. Otherwise, you get a tip that's like a little narrower that won't clog as often. Tails, when you're spraying and you got a fan, that's really heavy on the edges and not much in the middle, you'll know because it's coming out, the spray on the wall is really heavy on the edges and light in the center. That's what you call tails. And that's always caused by low pressure. Again, too thick of a material, too cold maybe, too long of a skinny hose, tip is bigger than your pump not working right, blah, 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 blah. You can kind of cheat a little bit by lowering the size of your spray tip. That way it won't fly out the gun faster than the pump can push it through the hose, and maybe that'll save the day. Otherwise, eliminate a section of hose or heat up the paint or fix the pump or something. Then there's what they call fingers. So you got your fan, and if you got a bunch of thick lines within your fan, that's always like either like debris stuck on the inside of that the orifice or the hole, or the tip is damaged. If it's debris, simply turn to clean out, turn it back, and then you should have a good fan again. And when I say turn to clean out, I don't just mean turn. I mean turn, pull the trigger, turn it back. You should, and then you get a clean fan. If after doing that, you still have those same fingers, somebody tried to clean that tip out with a utility knife or ream it out with a welding wire or something like that, and that tip is damaged, you got to chuck it and get a new one. If the tip is leaking, like right around here, then it's probably leaking between the tip and the seat, that metal to metal connection. So what to watch out for is sometimes there's like cuts. If it's been leaking a while, there's like cuts here or cuts on the seat. But chances are, more than likely, it's just like all crapped up with paint. And what happens if this is a film of paint on the inside of that seat, what happens, the pressure will like punch a hole through the paint and then just leak out there. And you can't tighten it anymore because it's tight up against the paint. So what you got to do is clean all the paint off, both of the tip and the seat, and then put it back, and chances are that'll stop the leak. If it doesn't stop the leak, it could be you have a Graco tip and somebody else's seal. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. If it's leaking out by the threads, then you have a problem with the seal, with the rubber seal part of the deal. And there, it's the same thing. There's like, it's either coated with paint, or the rubber part of the deal got smushed, or the front of the gun has like a film of paint on it. So make sure those surfaces are clean. One thing to consider is these are hand tight guards, right? And it should always be hand tight. If you have like if everything's dirty and you have to wrench the thing on in order to get it to quit leaking, what's gonna happen, as soon as the tip clogs, now you've got 3,000 PSI of pressure pushing that tip up against the guard, and you're not gonna be able to turn it to clean it out. You're either gonna have to get a wrench and like bust the handle off trying to turn it, or loosen this thing up and turning this, tightening it up, blasting it out, loosening it up again, blah, 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 blah. So it's really important to keep the whole tip assembly, the tip, that hole in there, that hole, the threads on your gun, the front of your gun, and the seat in your seal, just clean. So you can just like spin this on and until you get a little bit of friction, and boom, you're good to go. And then when the tip clogs, it's really easy to turn it, to clear it out, turn it, clear it back, and you're good to go. That's all I got. And so if you have any questions, 800-400-5084 or Greg at bsesprayit.com or comment or something. Thanks.